Americans wondered just how close the federal government is or was to the pharmaceutical industry. An oversight investigation by openthebooks.com, reveals just how close they were. Joining us now is openthebooks.com founder Adam Andrzejewski. Adam, thanks for joining us on the National Desk.
Great to be here.
So you investigated the National Institutes of Health specifically regarding grants and royalties. What did you find there?
We found a revolving door. Last year, the National Institutes of Health, they doled out over $30 billion in grant making to over 50,000 recipients. Coming back through the other door, we found that over the course of the last 12 years, $325 million flowed from the industry, think pharmaceutical companies, back into the National Institutes of Health, enriching the agency, its leadership, and 2,400 of its scientists. Now, look, every single one of those payments has the potential to be a conflict of interest. And as a matter of fact, the acting director of the National Institutes of Health in a U.S. House Appropriations hearing last year admitted that. He said every single payment has the appearance of a conflict of interest.
Well, investigating this type of information and dealing with the government can be challenging at times. What kind of pushback, if any, did you face while you were digging up these papers?
It was fierce. The National Institutes of Health did everything they could to stop us and the information coming to light. We filed nearly 2 years ago our Freedom of Information Act request, and NIH ignored it. They forced us into expensive federal litigation. When we won that, they slow-walked over a 10-month period, 3,000 pages worth of line-by-line third-party royalty information. When we got that production, it was heavily redacted and blacked out, so the production was virtually worthless. And then you had its leadership, like Lawrence Tabak, the acting director, and Anthony Fauci, go in front of Senate hearings and say essentially that no further information was forthcoming. But just last week, we achieved a big transparency victory. For the first time in history, we forced the National Institutes of Health to disclose who the companies who paid the $325 million worth of royalties since 2009.
We know a lot of conservatives specifically have been targeting Dr. Anthony Fauci for a lot of these cases. What, if anything, did you find there?
So we found the names of the three companies who paid Fauci's royalties. So Dr. Anthony Fauci, he wasn't receiving a lot of royalty payments. All the amounts are still blacked out. We don't know the exact amounts he was receiving, but he wasn't receiving a lot of payments, but scientists around him were receiving a lot of third-party royalty payments. Up to 2,400 scientists received over 50,000 payments from the industry since 2009. And so Ansel Corporation, you've got Santa Cruz Biotech, and you've got Shamron, who was purchased by Novartis 15 years ago. Santa Cruz Biotech is the ranked fifth on the count of third-party royalty payments, and Novartis has received over $2 billion worth of federal payments on contracts and grants since 2008, including over $30 million from the National Institutes itself. And so Fauci wasn't receiving a lot of payments, but companies paying him and scientists around him were engaged in this segment.
And so you found obviously some other what you would consider to be high-profile individuals who had questionable financials?
Yes, so the former director of the National Institutes of Health, Francis Collins, he received 27 payments from 4 companies. Those 4 companies received, since 2008, out of federal agencies, over $50 million, nearly $50 million. We also have the 3-time acting director of the National Cancer Institute, who's an executive for decades at the National Cancer Institute, who received 192 payments from 32 companies. And this begs the question, how can you be in leadership at the National Institutes of Health, whether you're Collins, Fauci, or Douglas Lowy over at the National Cancer Institute, and receive third-party royalty payments while you're making decisions on grant making?
What about other countries involved with these royalties?
Well, we found that adversarial nations like China, Russia, and even Belarus are dialed in licensing technology developed in the NIH labs, paid for by taxpayers, and then paying royalties back to the agency. For instance, in Belarus, they are a puppet government to the Russians. In Russia, we found an animal vaccine maker with alleged Soviet ties on bioweapons, paying NIH royalties and licensing our technology. And in China, you have state-owned enterprises owned by the Chinese Communist Party that had partnered with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They're paying NIH royalties for technology developed on the taxpayer dime in the NIH labs.
All right, sounds like there's a lot more to look into there. All right, Adam Andrzejewski, founder of OpenTheBooks.com. We appreciate your time here on the National Desk. We'll be right back.